This has to be the dumbest video that I have ever laid my eyes upon, so enjoy.
Hello people, so here we have the top 10 reasons why Nazi Germany was socialist.
I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
So, before we get on to the arguments in this video, can we all just at the least come together and agree that that intro is complete cringe? Like, we're talking about John Doyle levels of cringe here, and that's hard to do. Like, sorry Scotty, you posted cringe, dude. You're going to lose subscriber.
So in at number 10, here we have the term Nazi. The term Nazi was abbreviated for National Socialismus, which basically meant National Socialism.
So, you know, it's really weird because every time this topic is discussed, I always hear the same common dipshit arguments to why the Nazis were supposedly left-wing. And the same thing that I hear over and over again is the Nazis were leftist because they had the term National Socialist in their party's name. And this is stupid because it doesn't acknowledge the sort of broader context of why the term socialism was in the party's name. You see, the term socialism and National Socialism has literally nothing to do with, say, workplace democracy or worker ownership of industry. The term National Socialism, to Hitler and the Nazis, was essentially national unity and being loyal to your nation. It is nothing more than a redefinition of the term to attract working class people to the movement. Also, this is barely even an argument. I mean, if you're going to give me reasons for why Nazi Germany was a socialist country, can you at least give me, say, I don't know, economic policies or maybe what the economic structure looked like under Nazi Germany?
In at number 9, here we have Nazi Germany, where the Nazis had marched under red banners and flags, the colour red representing socialism.
Wow, my friends, my comrades, you heard it here first. At number 9, we have the color red. Once again, this is just not an argument. It has nothing to do with any economic policies or the economic structure, so I'm just gonna skip this. Also, you do realize that the color red is like one of the most basic colors when it comes to flags, right? I mean, the color of the Republican Party is fucking red. You dumb fuck. But you know, I guess it makes sense because Scotty M is just so fervently anti-communist that the color red equals socialism to him.
In at number 8, we have the Nazi Germany propagandist posters. The Nazi Germany propagandist posters were very identical to the Soviet Union. You could barely tell a difference.
Once again, Scotty, this is not an argument. It doesn't tell me anything about the Nazi economy whatsoever. Also, hey, Scotty, you know what else I could find? I could also find a bunch of anti-socialist and anti-communist propaganda posters from the Nazis too. What do you say about that, Scotty? I'm fighting fire with fire over here.
And at number 7, we have the evidence of a Nazi propagandist poster stating they hated capitalism. So this is one of the Nazi propagandist posters. In clear words, it says, Met Deutschland tegen het Kapitalism, which basically translated to, with Germany against capitalism.
Once again, this is just not an argument. It doesn't tell me any policies, it doesn't tell me what the Nazi economy looked like, it tells me none of that. I mean, if Hitler and the Nazis truly were so anti-capitalist, why is it that they ended up allying with wealthy capitalists and industrialists? Why do they end up implementing mass privatization within their economy? Why is it that they ended up killing off the supposedly socialist faction within their own party, the Strasserites? Why is it that the Nazis rounded up leftists of all types, communists, socialists, anarchists, social democrats, and put them in concentration camps? Because it's just rhetoric. The anti-capitalist thought in ideologies like Nazism and fascism are nothing more than rhetoric to attract working class people to their movements. They mean absolutely nothing.
And at number 6, we have the identical symbolism between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Not only was the posters of propaganda more or less the same between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, but also one of these coins, as you can see, with not just the swastika, but of course the hammer and sickle. And of course, it was the Soviet Union that had the swastika before Nazi Germany.
Not an argument. It's not an argument. Not an argument. It's not an argument. Not an argument. It's not an argument. Not an argument. It's not an argument.
And at number 5, Hitler did not hide the fact he was a collectivist. Hitler said in his own words, "Society's needs come before the individual's needs."
I mean, is this statement collectivist? Yeah, sure, but it doesn't mean it's socialist. Like, Scotty, you do realize that not everything that's collectivist is socialist, right? Like, you do realize that there are ideologies out there that are very collectivist, but at the same time are not socialist, correct? For example, Hitler was a nationalist. Okay, and nationalism is an ideology about, national unity. And in that respect, nationalism is very collectivist. You need to understand that left and right is not based upon collectivism and individualism. You can be a leftist and an anti-capitalist who is also an individualist, someone like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, just as you can also be a right-winger who still believes in private ownership of industry, who is also a collectivist in many other respects.
And of course, Adolf Hitler told his associate, "We must find and travel the road from individualism to socialism without revolution."
Once again, it's just rhetoric, and it means nothing. Also, you have still yet to make an actual economic argument.
It wasn't so much the fact that he hated Marxism, it was that he hated the tactics behind Marxism, which was a revolutionary one. He believed in moving peacefully away from individualism to collectivism.
So, was Hitler a collectivist? I mean, yeah, to an extent he was. But so what? You do realize that not all collectivism is socialism, right? Like, you do realize that right-wingers consistently play into and support forms of collectivism, right? Things like race, nation, religion, the traditional family unit, military. These are collectives that the right wing consistently support. You can be a right-winger who believes in private ownership of industry and still be a collectivist to a certain extent, just like how you can be a leftist and a socialist and still believe in individualism to an extent. You see, politics and political theory is not just like a one-dimensional line graph in which there's collectivists on one side and there's individualists on the other. That's dumb. That's stupid.
And at number 4 we have the synonym for collectivism. When we look at the words socialism and collectivism, by definition, and of course, when we look for the synonym for collectivism, it is socialism. That's why when you hear about collectivised farming and collectivised healthcare, it's really just the same thing as socialised healthcare or socialised farming, because the word collectivism means more or less the same thing as socialism. Both by definition mean the control and management of the economy.
So, once again, Scotty M here is conflating all forms of collectivism with socialism, and he illustrates this point by using an online dictionary. Obviously, we should all know you should never do this. If you want to learn more about a particular political ideology, you should probably read about that ideology, or you could instead ask somebody who is subscribed to that ideology just what they believe. Now, as for the Nazis having control of the German economy, no. The Nazis did not have state control of the German economy. Absolutely not. Sure, they had regulations in the economy, but every capitalist economy has regulations. The fact of the matter is that the means of production within Nazi Germany, things like businesses, shops, boutiques, restaurants, factories, shipyards, banks, these things were owned by private businessmen and wealthy capitalists. Now, not to say that all of these things in full were privately owned. Of course not. Not everything can be privately owned. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of the means of production within Nazi Germany were privately owned. And that would constitute the Nazi economy as being capitalist. There is nothing you could do or say to change this historical fact.
And at number 3, Hitler made it clear why he hated Jews. Hitler said in his own words, "If we are socialists, then we must definitely be anti-Semites, and the opposite in that case is materialism and Mammonism, which we seek to oppose. How, as a socialist, can you not be an anti-Semite?
I said it once and I'll say it again, Scotty. It's just rhetoric and it means nothing. It is not reflective of actual Nazi economic policy.
Hitler also in 1930 told Otto Strasser, "I am a socialist, and a very different kind of socialist to your rich friend Count Reventlow," as he did not hide the fact he was a socialist, and he also said in 1927, "We are socialists, enemies of today's capitalistic economic system."
That last quote was actually never said by Hitler. That last quote was actually said by a man named Gregor Strasser, who is a member of the Strasserite faction of the Nazi Party. The Strasserites were the anti-capitalist wing of the Nazi Party that was purged in the Night of the Long Knives by the main Hitlerite faction. Obviously, you don't mention this because that's contrary to what you're trying to push here.
And at number 2 we have Hitler's nationalisation.
Wait a second, are we actually going in the right direction here? Are we about to get something that is actually resembling an economic argument?
Hitler nationalised many things. He nationalised education, he nationalised healthcare, nationalised the automobile industry in Austria, he nationalised so many other things such as the churches, the banks, he nationalised radio, newspaper, and of course, not to forget that he did not abolish the trade unions in 1933, he simply replaced them with his very own, known as the German Labour Front.
Okay, so I'm going to do this point by point because Scotty kind of just listed a bunch of things here. So he talks about nationalization, and he brings up a couple of things that I want to kind of correct him on. So he brings up nationalized healthcare. And it is true that Germany did have nationalized healthcare, but it's important to understand that it wasn't nationalized by the Nazis. Their healthcare system was actually nationalized by the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, long before the Nazis even existed. Second of all, he mentions that banks within Nazi Germany were also nationalized. This is just plain false. Banks within Nazi Germany were actually privatized when the Nazis were implementing mass privatization throughout the German economy. So were there some sectors of the economy within Nazi Germany that were nationalized? Yes, of course. Every capitalist country has some sectors of the economy that just aren't privately owned. America is a capitalist country, and we have nationalized education. Most European and Scandinavian countries are capitalist and have nationalized healthcare. Norway is a capitalist country, and they have nationalized oil. You can have a mainly capitalist economy based on private ownership of industry and still have some sectors of the economy that just are off limits to private hands. You know, Scotty, since we're on the topic of nationalization and privatization, why don't we look at this PDF article entitled Against the Mainstream, Nazi Privatization in 1930s Germany. Now, obviously, I'm not going to read the entire thing because it's 28 pages long, so if any of you want to read the rest of it, you can find it in the description. But anyway, it says here, the government of the Nazi Party sold off public ownership in several state-owned firms in the mid-1930s. These firms belonged to a wide range of sectors: steel, mining, banking, local public utilities, shipyards, ship lines, railways, etc. In addition, the delivery of some public services that were produced by the government prior to the 1930s, especially social and labor-related services, were then transferred to the private sector, mainly to organizations within the party. Also, Scotty, in regards to what you said about labor unions, you were absolutely wrong. The Nazis absolutely destroyed trade unions. On May 2nd, 1933, Adolf Hitler's stormtroopers occupied all trade union headquarters across Germany, and union leaders were arrested and put into prisons or concentration camps. Many were beaten and tortured. All of the union funds, in other words, the workers' money, were confiscated, and former union officials were on blacklists, preventing them from finding work. In regards to what you say about the German Labor Front, yes, it is true that it was a union for workers, but it was also a union that ended up representing the interests of businessmen and owners.
And number 1, the one you hear about all the time, the Nazis had the socialists and communists sent to concentration camps to die.
Wait, how does this help your case? I mean, you do realize you're making the argument for me, correct? I mean, yeah, if the Nazis rounded up leftists of all stripes, communists, socialists, anarchists, social democrats, and sent them to concentration camps, maybe that means he's not very fond of leftists, you know, just a thought.
The fact of the matter is, Adolf Hitler was not an anti-socialist, he was just someone who wiped out his competition, and that is more or less all it was. It was a competition between one socialist faction to another socialist faction. So anyway people, thanks for watching my video, hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you later. Cheers.
No, Scotty. Hitler did not dislike the left-wing parties in Germany because of quote-unquote competition. Where are you getting this information? I feel like you're just making this shit up. I mean, like, we can actually go and find out just what Hitler believed, okay? And when we do this, what do we see? We see this. In Hitler's mind, communism was a major enemy of Germany, an enemy he often mentions in Mein Kampf. During the trial for his involvement in the Beer Hall Putsch, Hitler claimed that a singular goal was to assist the German government in fighting Marxism. Marxism, Bolshevism, and communism were interchangeable terms for Hitler as evidenced by their use in Mein Kampf. Later in his seminal tome, Hitler advocated for the destruction of Marxism in all of its shapes and forms. According to Hitler, Marxism was a Jewish strategy to subjugate Germany and the world, and saw Marxism as a mental and political form of slavery. From Hitler's vantage point, Bolsheviks existed to serve Jewish international finance. When the British tried negotiating with Hitler in 1935 by including Germany in the extension of the Locarno Pact, he rejected their offer and instead assured that German rearmament was important in safeguarding Europe against communism, a move which clearly showed his anti-communist proclivities. In 1939, Hitler told the Swiss commissioner to the League of Nations that everything he was undertaking was directed against Russia, and that if those in the West are too stupid or too blind to understand this, then I should be forced to come to an understanding with the Russians to beat the West, and then after its defeat, turn with all my concerted force against the Soviet Union. When Hitler finally ordered the attack against the Soviet Union, it was the fulfillment of his ultimate goal and the most important campaign in his estimation, as it comprised a struggle of the chosen Aryan people against Jewish Bolsheviks. Biographer Alan Bullock avows Hitler laid great stress on the need to concentrate on a single enemy, an enemy he lumps together as Marxism and the Jew. Shortly in the wake of the Commissar Order, a directive pursuant to the German invasion of the Soviet Union, SS Deputy Reinhard Heydrich informed the SS of Hitler's geopolitical philosophy, which conflated Bolshevism and Jews, writing that Eastern Jewry is the intellectual reservoir of Bolshevism, and in the Führer's view must therefore be annihilated. Considering the eventual Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, no additional inducements are really requisite concerning Hitler's hatred of communism, particularly since the Nazi persecution and extermination of these groups was not only systematic, but it was extensive both within Germany and only intensified in the occupied zones during the war under Hitler's leadership. Because Nazism co-opted the popular success of communism among working-class people, while at the same time promising to destroy communism and offer an alternative to it, Hitler's anti-communist program allowed industrialists with conservative views tending towards monarchism, aristocracy, and laissez-faire capitalism to cast their lot with and help underwrite the Nazi rise to power. Now let me direct you towards this article here. It's entitled List of Companies Involved in the Holocaust, and it's basically just an article that shows a list of companies that collaborated with the Nazis during the Holocaust. Now let me redirect you towards this article entitled The Economy of Nazi Germany. The German economy, like those of many other Western nations, suffered the effects of the Great Depression, with unemployment soaring around the Wall Street crash of 1929. When Adolf Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany in 1933, he introduced policies aimed at improving the economy. The changes including privatization of state-owned industries, autarky, and tariffs on imports. The Nazi government developed a partnership with leading German business interests who supported the goals of the regime and its war effort in exchange for advantageous contracts, subsidies, and the suppression of the trade union movement. Cartels and monopolies were encouraged at the expense of small businesses, even though the Nazis had received considerable electoral support from small business owners. Nazi Germany maintained a supply of slave labor composed of prisoners and concentration camp inmates, which was greatly expanded after the beginning of World War II. In Poland alone, some 5 million citizens, including Polish Jews, were used as slave labor throughout the war. Among the slave laborers in the occupied territories, hundreds of thousands were used by leading German corporations including Thyssen, Krupp, IG Farben, Bosch, Junkers, Volkswagen, as well as the Dutch corporation Philips. By 1944, slave labor made up 1/4 of Germany's entire workforce, and the majority of German factories had a contingent of prisoners. So this article is basically talking about a collaboration between the Nazi government and private businesses and corporations, which we all know is a very anti-socialist position to take. Privatization and business ties. The Great Depression had spurred increased state ownership in most Western capitalist countries. This also took place in Germany during the last years of the Weimar Republic. But after the Nazis took power, industries were privatized en masse. Several banks, shipyards, railway lines, shipping lines, welfare organizations, and more were privatized. However, this privatization was applied within a framework of increasing control of the state over the whole economy through regulation and political interference. The Nazi government took the stance that enterprise should be in private hands wherever possible. State ownership was to be avoided unless it was absolutely necessary for the rearmament for the war effort. The Reich often insisted on the inclusion of the contract of an option clause according to which the private firm operating the plant was entitled to purchase it. One of the reasons for the Nazi privatization policy was to cement the partnership between the government and business interests. Another reason was financial. As the Nazi government faced budget deficits due to its military spending, privatization was one of the methods it used to raise more funds. Between the fiscal years of 1934 through 1935 and 1937 through 1938, privatization represented 1.4% of the German government's revenues. There was also an ideological motivation. Nazi ideology held entrepreneurship in high regard, and private property was considered a precondition to developing the creativity of members for the German race in the best interest of the people. The Nazi leadership believed that private property itself provided important incentives to achieve greater cost consciousness, efficiency gains, and technical progress. Adolf Hitler used social Darwinist arguments to support this stance, cautioning against bureaucratic managing of the economy that would preserve the weak and represent a burden to the higher ability, industry, and value. The month after being appointed Chancellor, Hitler made a personal appeal to German business leaders to help fund the Nazi Party for the crucial months that were to follow. He argued that they should support him in establishing a dictatorship because private enterprise could not be maintained in the age of democracy, and because democracy would allegedly lead to communism. In the following weeks, the Nazi Party received contributions from 17 different business groups, with the largest coming from IG Farben and Deutsche Bank. Many of these businesses continued to support Hitler even during the war and even profited from the persecution of the Jews. The most infamous being firms like Krupp, IG Farben, and some large automobile manufacturers. Historian Adam Tooze writes that the leaders of German business were therefore willing partners in the destruction of political pluralism within Germany. In exchange, owners and managers of German businesses were granted unprecedented powers to control their workplace, collective bargaining was abolished, and wages were frozen at a relatively low level. Business profits also rose very rapidly, as did corporate investment. The rhetoric of the Nazi regime stated that German private companies would be protected and privileged as long as they supported the economic goals of the government, mainly by participating in government contracts for military production, but that they could face severe penalties if they went against the national interest. However, such threats were rarely carried out in practice, and companies normally could refuse to engage with an investment project designed by the state without any consequences. Private firms refused government contracts and directions on many occasions. So I think I'm just going to end the video off here. This was definitely one of my longer videos. It took me quite a while to make. If you guys liked this video, maybe drop a sub, drop a like. I'll see you guys later. Peace.